Have you ever been in a situation where you didn't quite understand what was going on, but instead of asking a question, you just kind of decided to roll with it and see what happened? So maybe you've done this in a conversation where someone says something that you don't quite understand or references, like, a song or a movie that you haven't watched or something like that. And instead of asking, you just kind of nod and go with the flow and hope that it doesn't catch up to you. But then they ask a follow-up question, and suddenly, you're way too deep in the conversation, and you just can't keep up, and you're just trying to not look stupid. I was having lunch with Reverend Paul a couple weeks ago, and we were chatting, and the server came over, and she was chatting with us, and I said a word, I don't know, it was kind of a weird word, and she kind of turned this on me, and she was like, "Oh, I haven't heard that word. What does that mean?" And then I had to try to come up with the meaning of this word that I had just used, kind of, whatever. So in any case, we've probably all been there, right? They're true and small moments of everyday life, and certainly low-stakes examples. But it's interesting that when we don't ask questions and when we don't get curious, we can often misunderstand what's really going on. We might make assumptions, we might miss some important details, and sometimes those misunderstandings can leave us completely out of sync with what's actually happening. And this is often true in our relationships. When we don't ask questions from one another, real questions, we don't just risk awkward moments, we risk missing out on each other entirely. And so that's what this new worship series is about. This I've been meaning to ask. So for the next 4 weeks, we're going to go through a series of questions that are designed to engage us in a process of becoming community, which is kind of what we're about, right, as a church? This community of compassion and connection and love. It's part of the work that we do here in this space. It's also part of the work that we do in the broader community. And it's part of the important work that we're doing among the other United Methodist churches in the Valley. This becoming community begins with this courage to ask honest questions. And then with the willingness to listen to the answers. And so I invite us to embrace this simple phrase, I've been meaning to ask. And so over the next several weeks, we're going to practice this together. We're going to ask questions that aren't surface level, questions that invite us to go deeper, that hopefully create space for meaningful and vulnerable conversations. Because the truth is that courageous conversation doesn't happen all at once. It takes time. Questions invite us to go deeper, and they create space for real, meaningful conversation. So this morning, we are not starting out easily, my friends. Reverend Paul is actually preaching what would have been the first of this series at Palisade and Redlands this morning, and his question is a little bit easier. It's, where are you from? We're gonna go right into it. And our question this morning is, where does it hurt? Now, I don't want us to confuse this deep, meaningful question with the polite version, how are you doing? Because we all know that when we ask someone, "How are you doing?" we are not expecting an honest answer. But when we ask someone, "Where does it hurt?" the expectation is that we're creating space for them to share. It's the kind of question that slows us down, the kind that makes space and that says, "I'm here and I'm ready to listen. So tell me, where does it hurt?" And the truth is that we're all hurting somewhere. Some of our hurt is visible. It's loss that has a name or grief that has a timeline. But much of it is hidden. It's that quiet ache or the private struggle or the things that we've just learned not to say out loud. Because somewhere along the way, we've bought into this idea that it's polite to not share our grief. That we don't want to make other people uncomfortable. Or that some struggles are just easier to carry alone rather than sharing. And so over time, we become really good at this, don't we? When someone says, "How are you?" we smile and we say, "Great, just great. How are you?" And this is that space where we meet Hannah. And before we get too far into the story, I want to acknowledge just a couple things, because this is one of those passages that can bring up some stuff for people. Hannah is struggling with infertility, and that's something that many of us have shared. Hannah is a whole person, regardless of her ability to bear children. And while God's answer in this case is that Hannah does eventually bear a son, that is not always the answer that we are given. And so I just want to take a minute to recognize that this pain is real, and it might be present for some of us. Hannah's suffering, though, isn't just internal. It's compounded. She's mocked and provoked and misunderstood. And she has this moment where she brings her honest pain before God, and she's weeping and praying and pouring out her soul. And Eli, the priest, assumes the worst of her. And he mistakes her anguish for drunkenness. It's in that space where she should have been the safest, where her pain is misinterpreted. And I'm going to share something with you that I don't like that it's true, but it is at times. In the course of my being a pastor and serving in various congregations all over and being a part of different communities, while it should not be the case, it is often in our faith spaces where people feel the least open to sharing their grief and their burdens. How often have we seen a member of the congregation lose someone they love and they vanish from church for weeks? It doesn't always happen, but it does. Sometimes church is the place where we hide the most pain. And then we meet Hannah in this place, and this is the turning point of her story. In this space where she should be the most safe, with this person that she should feel the safest with, Her grief is misinterpreted. And instead of going quietly away, Hannah does something so brave. And she turns to Eli and she says, basically, no, that's not what this is. I am hurting, and I am pouring out my soul to God. And something in that moment shifts for Hannah and for Eli. And he gets it, and he listens. He sits still, and he sees her and hears her. He doesn't try to fix it. He doesn't solve her problem. He doesn't offer her a strategy or a plan. What Eli does in that moment is that he acknowledges her pain and he blesses her. And our passage today tells us something remarkable. Hannah leaves that space, and her spirit is no longer sad. There's nothing at this point in the story that has changed about her situation. But she has been seen, and she's been heard. And in that act of care, she is changed. And so the question becomes for us, what does that mean for us? If we're going to be a community shaped by the questions that we've all been meaning to ask, then we have to be honest about two things. First, that we hurt. Not just those people out there or those other people, but us. We hurt. There are stories sitting in the pews that we don't know. There's grief that hasn't been named and struggles that haven't been spoken. Some of us carry depression or anxiety that others never see. Some of us grieve relationships or stability or a sense of purpose. Some of us carry wounds from systems that have harmed and overlooked. And many of us have just gotten really, really, really good at hiding that, even from each other. And so the first invitation is this. What would it look like for us to become a community as honest as Hannah? A community that trusts that there's no right way to feel or no proper way to hurt or to heal. To believe that our pain isn't something to be ashamed of, but that is something that can be held. That can be held by God and maybe even each other. And then secondly, the invitation is to be a people who witness pain, who hold space, not in a way that fixes or solves or explains, but witness it. Just as Eli did. The practice of presence, the kind of listening that becomes holy and transformational. When we bear witness to each other's pain, we say to the other, I see you, and I believe you, and you are not alone. And let's face it, we live in a world that often minimizes or dismisses or ignores pain altogether. And the kind of presence that holds space is where transformation can happen. And let's be honest, this is not easy. Relationships are not easy. Community is not easy. Being in pain is not easy, and naming pain is even harder. It requires us to slow down, to be uncomfortable, and to step into spaces that we'd rather avoid. And it means asking questions and being ready for the truth. And so this morning, I am going to ask you all to do something for me. And that is to just hold space for a few moments as I share something with you. And I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I had absolutely no intention of sharing this until I wrote this sermon. And I realized that I couldn't, with any integrity, preach this sermon without the willingness to practice it. I want to share with you all that after 29 years of marriage, my husband and I have decided to divorce. It's as amicable as these things can be. There is no injury, there's no break of trust, there's no abuse or anything like that. We've just decided to part. It is also not the reason that I am being appointed to another ministry, so I want to be clear about that. But I do want to let you know that this is something that's been going on. We separated shortly before Christmas, and it has not been easy, and it's been hard, and many of you know the pain. And so I share this with you as a way to model what it means to be in community with one another in a way that shares with each other those places where it hurts. And what I ask is that you don't do anything to fix it, but that you just hold space. And that in doing this together and in this practice, that we grow closer to one another and closer to God and closer to what that beloved community that God invites us to really looks like. Because it doesn't look like coming here on Sunday morning and pretending everything's okay. Or asking each other the easy question, how are you? It looks like sharing our stories and sharing our pain and holding space and loving each other through all of it. And I'm grateful to you, and I'm grateful for a place where I feel safe sharing this. So the invitation is simple, but it's not easy. Gently and sincerely and with intention, would you ask that question to one another? Where does it hurt? And then would we be a people that we listen without rushing, and we listen without correcting. We listen without the hardest thing, turning the story back to ourselves. And that we risk telling the truth, even just a little bit. And here is the good news, my friends. That God is not distant from our pain. God is with us in it. God is with us in those moments of quiet prayer, in those moments of chaos, in rooms filled with grief. God hears and God sees and God meets each of us exactly where we are. And God gives us the gift of one another. And so my prayer for myself and all of us is that we be the kind of community that asks, that listens, that we are a community that makes space for the truth, whatever that truth is, and that we are a community where no one has to suffer in silence. May it be so. Amen.